It was a Friday evening like any other. Dan, my husband of 15 years, had just walked through the door, loosening his tie and flashing me his usual smile. "Hey, Claire," he said, dropping his briefcase by the couch. "I ran into Alan at work today. He invited us over for dinner tomorrow night." Alan was Dan's colleague, a sharp, confident man in his mid-40s. I'd only met him a handful of times at work functions, but he always struck me as charismatic, the type of man who could command a room without saying much. The idea of a quiet dinner at his home seemed harmless enough. I nodded, smiling. "Sure, sounds nice. What should I bring?" The next day, I found myself obsessing over the details more than usual. I chose a deep blue dress that Dan always said brought out my eyes, and spent extra time curling my hair. Something about this dinner felt important, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. Alan's home was as polished as he was. The modern architecture, the soft lighting, and the faint scent of fresh lavender in the air all made me feel like I'd stepped into a magazine spread. Alan greeted us warmly, his handshake firm yet lingering just a second longer than expected. Throughout the evening, Alan's charm was on full display. He laughed at Dan's jokes, shared interesting stories, and kept the conversation flowing effortlessly. But I couldn't ignore the way his eyes seemed to find mine more often than necessary. It wasn't overt, but it was enough to make my heart race. When Dan stepped outside to take a phone call, Alan seized the opportunity. "You know," he began, his voice lower and softer than before, "Dan is a lucky man." "You're remarkable, Claire." The words caught me off guard. I managed a polite smile, brushing it off as a simple compliment, but deep down, I felt a flutter I hadn't experienced in years. The days that followed were strange. Dan didn't mention Alan much, and I didn't ask. But I couldn't stop replaying fragments of that evening in my mind. Alan's lingering looks, his carefully chosen words, they had planted a seed of curiosity I couldn't ignore. Then, out of the blue, Alan called. "Hey, Claire," he said, his tone casual yet confident. "Dan mentioned you're great at organizing events. I'm hosting a small gathering for some clients next week and could use your expertise." I hesitated. Was this a professional request or something more? "Sure," I replied cautiously. "I'd be happy to help." Over the next few days, I found myself at Alan's house more often than I'd anticipated. At first, it was all business, choosing decorations, discussing catering options. But soon, our conversations shifted. Alan had a way of making me feel seen, understood. He asked about my passions, my dreams, things Dan hadn't asked me about in years. One evening, as we reviewed the seating arrangements, Alan leaned closer. "Claire," he said, his voice almost a whisper, "I feel like I can be myself around you." "That's rare." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I felt a pang of guilt, but also a thrill I couldn't deny. "Alan," I began, trying to keep my tone neutral, "you're easy to talk to." "But I'm married." "I know," he said, his eyes searching mine. "I respect that. But I can't pretend there's nothing here." The night of Alan's gathering was a turning point. I arrived early to help with the final preparations, dressed in a sleek black dress that Alan had complimented earlier in the week. The evening went off without a hitch, and Alan's clients were clearly impressed. But as the last guest left, the atmosphere shifted. Alan poured us each a glass of wine, his eyes never leaving mine as he handed me the glass. "To a successful evening," he said, his voice warm and inviting. "To teamwork," I replied, trying to keep things light. But the intensity of his gaze made it hard to maintain my composure. We sat on the couch, the room bathed in the soft glow of candlelight. "Claire," he said, his tone serious now, "I don't want to complicate your life. But I can't keep this to myself anymore. You've awakened something in me I thought was long gone. I felt my heart pound in my chest. Alan, this isn't fair, to me, to Dan, to anyone, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. I know, he said, reaching for my hand. His touch was electric, sending shivers down my spine. But I also know you deserve to feel alive, to be seen. Tears welled in my eyes. Alan's words echoed truths I'd been too afraid to confront. My marriage to Dan had grown comfortable, but stagnant. Alan's attention made me feel wanted in a way I hadn't felt in years. In that moment, I had a choice to make. I could walk away, pretend this never happened, and return to my life as it was. Or I could acknowledge the undeniable connection between Alan and me, and take a leap into the unknown. In the weeks that followed, I made difficult decisions. I sat down with Dan and had an honest conversation about our marriage. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Alan's boldness had forced me to confront feelings I'd buried for years, and while I didn't know what the future held, I knew I couldn't live in denial anymore. Alan and I remained in touch, our connection growing deeper with each passing day. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was real, raw, and filled with possibilities. Sometimes, life's most unexpected moments are the ones that lead us to rediscover who we truly are. And for that, I would always be grateful.